The Hog's Die is brought to you by TicketClub.com, your one-stop shop for live events nationwide. Whether you're looking for game, theater, or live performance tickets, don't sweat it. TicketClub.com has you covered. So make sure you're going there for all your live entertainment needs, and make sure you're clicking over to them from the banner at the top of thehogsdie.com.
It's Just Business with Steve Thomas and John Worrell. And now, here's your host, Chris Leary.
Hello and welcome to another episode of It's Just Business on the Hogsty Network, a show where we look at the dollars and cents of the sports media industrial complex. We are down again. We're doing shorthanded shows, show after show. So it's just Steve and I. How you doing, Steve?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, it's the summer silly season. Everybody's always got stuff to do. Feel free to prioritize everything else but the show. It's okay. John couldn't be here. We tried to get a fill-in. Every fill-in had a scheduling issue, so you're going to be stuck with Chris and I for the show, which is okay. We will muddle through. Somehow we will get through it.
You'll be fine. We will take good care of you. You're in soft hands. All right, so we're going to jump in as we are wont to do.
I want to have hard, manly hands, not soft hands. Don't lump me into your soft hand thing.
I gave you. I really thought you were going to let that go by, but
it just dawned on me. It's like, wait a minute, he just insulted me.
That's one of my favorite games, is seeing if Steve's going to pick them up or not. And your hit rate's pretty good. I'll give you that. All right, so we're going to start in a league that never sleeps, the National Football League. Still our lead topic in what is unquestionably the deadest time in their calendar, literally today, right now, this minute, this hour. But we still have interesting NFL news to discuss, like what the hell is going to happen in their next labor agreement, and what moves and wacky solutions are they floating leading up to that. Steve, why don't you just give us at least a look at where we are and the negotiations or pre-negotiations?
What's interesting is that some national media reported that the NFL and the Players Association were at least having pre-discussions, as you mentioned. It seemed to me like those were leaks coming from inside the NFL offices. Well, DeMaurice Smith later put out directly that wasn't happening. In other words, he was that probably is happening, but he's taking a hardline approach to it again this year. That's interesting. Regardless, the fact that they're even talking about it at all, and they haven't, we haven't seen in the media quite yet that there's a guaranteed lockout or strike coming, is at least a good sign. So that's a positive thing. So I think it's fair to say that they're talking to a certain extent. To what extent, who knows? The biggest issue will always be revenue split, but the most interesting part, of course, is the owners have forever wanted an 18-week season, and that has reared its ugly head again as a part of these sort of talks. My guess is whatever the teams agree probably won't happen before the next collective bargaining agreement. So that's kind of an overview. You want to get into the 18-game season now, Chris, or where do you want to go with it?
Sure. I think we can, I think talking about that can help us circle back to some of the bigger issues that they may have to suss out.
Okay, so the owners want an 18-game season, not because they're interested in increased competition or anything like that. That's not even a relevant point. The owners want an 18-game season so they can have increased TV revenue through 2 more weeks of NFL football. Okay? They would rather have 18 regular season weeks and fewer preseason games, because the preseason games are not on, for the most part, on national television contracts. So they do make money on these things in the form of ticket revenue and gate revenue in preseason, and they are broadcast mostly locally, although NFL Network carries like a game a week, and there may be 1 or 2 other games broadcast nationally, but for the most part, it's not a huge revenue generator in terms of broadcast rights. So they're more than willing to dump preseason games to bring in an 18-game season. The players are against this ostensibly because of health, which is also complete nonsense. What it's really about is money, and I have a feeling that if the parties can agree on a revenue split somehow, meaning that the owners decide to pay the players enough, mysteriously the health concerns about having 18 games will go away. What has happened this past week, would be last week for you guys. The latest thing that the owners have proposed is to have an 18-week season, 18-game season, wherein the players could only play in 16 games. Of course, this brings the dumbest of every world into it. It's just ridiculous, I think. So that's the proposal. We haven't really heard too much of a response to it. Chris, I know you have thoughts.
Well, it's just seriously dumb. I think the 18. I think that the 18 game season's coming, and I think it'll be a chief part of the collective bargaining agreement, expanding the season, decreasing the preseason, however they figure that out. I definitely think so. The fact that they're talking in and around ideas through that is probably, as you said, a good sign broadly and even maybe specifically on this issue. Now, this solution, however, for that problem is ludicrous. I don't understand how that would, even from a player safety issue, probably is disruptive too much. And it speaks to what I think is probably ultimately a solution here somewhere, in which this policy would necessitate, and that is expanded rosters and new roster rules. So, obviously, if you're going to have a roster that has to play 18 games and every player can only max out at 16, you have to expand the roster. I don't understand how you would do that, even entertain that idea without expanded rosters. But I think the expanded rosters are probably still part of the answer in some version of an 18-game season. Because I think even right now, if you kept status quo, they should expand the rosters. And I know it's more expensive. It's more expensive in head count. It's more expensive in salary. It's more expensive in maintenance of the size team, etc. But if the league and the teams want to protect the revenue they get from this many games, the regional TV contracts for preseason, the forced buying of preseason tickets by season ticket holders, etc., all those very lucrative revenue streams, then I think expanding the rosters is what they're going to have to do. And it would decrease injuries because you can cycle players in and out a little bit more. You can have more players available on game day, etc. So it's a horrendously stupid idea that I think is almost comical in how much it would fundamentally change how you manage and coach games. However, if it's an entryway into expanded rosters as a solution here in the CBA, it might be worth it in the long run.
I think, first of all, the owners are vehemently against expanding the rosters. I think they don't want to do that at all. What they want to do is dramatically increase gross revenue without decreasing the net, and so, expanding the rosters obviously is a greatly increased cost, and I think that's what it's about. The most obvious solution that wouldn't cost anybody any money is just to increase the game day rosters from 45 to 53.
Yeah, I think that would be a great first start.
Yeah, that's a start. At least there's more players available. In terms of this 18 games with people, the players play 16. My God, that's dumb. Number one, if you're going to dumb down your rosters like that, do you not, or your game day rosters, by forcing people to sit out, are you not concerned at all about what the viewing public wants to see? So you're going to make, pick your, Tom Brady sit out games. Who's going to want to go buy tickets for a game, not knowing whether your favorite star is actually going to be able to play or not? I don't understand why anybody would think that's good. Maybe the hardcore, really, truly hardcore X's and O's football fans would see it as an increased strategy point. Okay, when do you have to sit Tom Brady and when do you play him? But for your average fan, they just want to see their favorite players play. They don't care about the strategy of it or anything like that. And by creating this weird 18 game, 16 game thing, you are reducing the possibility that the average fan can see the players they want to see. And so I think that's just ridiculous. And the other thing is, in this proposal, if the players are only playing 16 games, I'm assuming then, I'm not assuming, does that mean that they only get 16 game checks in an 18 game season? And so is the NFL asking them to have 2 more weeks of practice and participation without paying them 2 more game checks? I mean, that part wasn't addressed, in it, because I also don't think the NFL particularly wants to. I think they're doing everything they can to avoid having to pay 2 more game checks. If I were the NFL, what I would do is this. If you really want an 18-game season, number one, pay everybody 2 more game checks, and then kick in another percentage point of the revenue split, the gross revenue split. Done. It seems to me that all you need to do is be upfront and honest and buy the players' participation, and it would be much simpler than creating some phony, construct like they've done here. Just pay them more money.
It's definitely been a theme of our last few episodes and it's going to continue through this one as well, of these sort of just kind of science fiction, wacky solutions to problems, which, as conversation starters go and a break in the mundane, they're not they're good. They're good for shows like this.
They are good for shows like this, and I think it's also equally ridiculous of the Players Association to create this idea in the public's head that this is about player safety. Come on. Seriously, if they just are paid enough money, the players will do this. It's just a matter of finding the right number and the right structure to make them do it. And the public, the public, generally speaking, I think likes to take the side of the little guy over the evil, billionaire owners in many respects. And so the public, I think, is buying this crock of nonsense about player safety. But the truth is, I think most people would love to see 2 more weeks of football. Who wouldn't want to see a longer football season? And so it's really just all about the players are taking this approach because they want to drive a harder bargain, to their credit, as they should. Nobody disputes that. So I think the NFL is doing everything they can to get an 18-game season with paying as little as possible. Of course, because they're the NFL.
And to your larger point about what this means for the CBA, these are smoke signals, so I don't want to say that this is hard evidence, but this kind of circling the drain at this point in the timeline is a generally positive thing, right? Like, so if they end up in, what people probably could have predicted, as you did, Steve, in terms of what is going to be the playing field of real, what eventually happens and how you eventually figure this out. This kind of circling the drain of conversation, of different ideas, of whittling down to getting to the space where you can get a real deal done, are generally positive signs for the process.
Oh yeah, yeah, definitely. Because if you go back to 2010, around this time, a year or so out, the parties were talking about a strike, or not a strike, a lockout. They were talking about a lockout already. That has not come up this year. We didn't know. We knew a year ahead of time there would be a lockout. Period. The end lockout, and that's what happened. They almost missed games. You pulled it out the very last minute. We said this on the show you missed, Chris, but what the NFL is doing here is the 100th anniversary of the NFL is coming up, and so I think that the NFL does want to market like an NFL 100 kind of deal. They don't want the public to be thinking lockout or strike. They want the NFL to be thinking 100th anniversary, and so that's part of the motivation here. I think is that. But it's definitely good that the teams are talking. The big picture items. I think if I were the general public, I think you need to understand that what is important to everybody is money. The other issues like marijuana use, player safety issues, all of that stuff are sort of secondary issue. The principal issue here is revenue split, and what I mean by that is there's in the definition of revenue, okay. Because that's a more complicated subject than you might think. Basically the CBA says this is the pot of gross revenue. We define gross revenue as X, and then the players get this much of it, and the NFL gets this much of it. meaning the NFL, meaning the owners. And so the argument is, number one, what's the percentage split? That's why the players were locked out last time, because the NFL owner said, we want to make more money, we're going to change the split, and you're going to have to deal with it, and you're going to have to like it. And that's why there was a lockout. But the other part of it is the NFL wants to define as little as possible as gross revenue, because anything that's not defined as gross revenue means they keep it without giving it to the players. And so that's the other part of the discussion. And so the broader, 18-game season thing is just a way to increase revenue, obviously. So there's lots to go on. We'll see what happens, in the coming year.
And if some part of this forced the league to expand game day rosters, even as a start, I would be pleased with a collateral benefit, maybe we'll call it.
Well, yeah, and increasing game day rosters doesn't cost them any money, so there's no reason to do it. And I've never understood why we had a 45, or 46 man game day roster anyway. Ostensibly it's for competitive reasons, and it's a strategy point. I mean, that to me, that's silly, really. I mean, because you're not deciding between your best players, you're just deciding which back of the roster guys don't get to dress, and that just seems silly to me. So just expand it to 53. It gives, if nothing else, it gives the teams more special teams options. Since special teams have become the pariah of the NFL now. So I think that's a good starting point with this, is just letting all 53 dress, and then maybe you don't have to. You're right. I agree with you, Chris, that they ought to increase the roster size, but I know the NFL, that's their last option. Well, they don't want to do it.
That's one of the things I find so wacky about this proposal. And let's be clear, there's probably nothing that is ever going to, materialize that looks like this proposal in the end. So, but I don't see how you would do that. I don't see how you would move to that kind of team and league management without like a pretty expanded roster. I mean, you'd have to. I mean, maybe you can reduce it at a third of the season. I don't know, but I mean, you'd have to play with almost a preseason mentality just to abide by the rule.
Yeah, but it costs them dramatically more money.
No, I'm just saying I don't see how you would do the 16 and 18 without it. I just don't know almost physically how you would even pull that off.
Well, I mean, you could do what the Redskins have done for the past 2 years, which is sign a bunch of scrubs off the street. That's what you do. You just keep signing guys. And again, I don't think the NFL front office particularly cares. I mean, you could field 50. You could field 22 players. If you really had to.
Yeah, I guess it'd almost be like a NFL version of the NBA 10-day contract.
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's not too different. I mean, in the 10-day contract is literally 10-day contract, and the NFL doesn't really have that. But yeah, I mean, from a practical working standpoint, sure, yeah, absolutely. You sign the guy, and he plays a couple weeks, and then you cut him and get rid of him.
Yeah, God. So can you imagine? Here's the pre-bye week influx of tackles, guards, and safeties.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, exactly right. It's like, okay, we have to sit some guys because, we're playing Cleveland this week, and, or some other scrub team, or, we're playing the Redskins this week, so we can sit our best players. So we need to sign we need to IR some people, and bring in a few more. Yeah, sure. I mean, that would be infinitely more acceptable to the NFL front office than expanding rosters, because that's no cost basically to them. Where expanding the rosters means a little dramatically more money. They should do it, but they won't.
Yeah. All right. Well, so we'll obviously continue to follow this big story. I have a feeling we may not see this zombie proposal reemerge, or maybe we will. I don't know. Next, we're heading off to the NBA, or maybe I should say professional basketball, because we're kind of doing a bit of a check-in on a myriad of issues with the Big Three. The Big Three we've talked about before on the show. It's Ice Cube and other entrepreneurs have put together this 3-on-3 league. It's kind of a traveling road show, barnstorming approach. It's just entered June 22nd. It's third season, so it just kicked off. Basically, it's maybe, 3-4 weeks into its 11-week season 3. It's got a TV deal with CBS, so you could watch it this weekend probably on CBS affiliate in your region. And there's a lot, kind of some mini stories swirling around this, so we thought we'd do a bit of a check-in. Steve, why don't you start with one of your old fallen warriors and his update?
Yeah. Lamar Odom is one of my favorite basketball players because he helped bring the 2020 NBA champion Lakers their last round of championships, not this coming round, but the last round of championships. Lamar Odom was an integral part of that, and so I always have rooted for him. Of course, in the immortal words of Stephen A. Smith, he was on crack. Which tends to have a negative impact on your basketball career. So Lamar was signed to the Big Three. It looks like Ice Cube personally probably approached him. Unfortunately, he and a couple others, Baron Davis, basically got cut this past week. And I don't know what it takes to get cut from the Big Three. It means you really weren't prepared. Because these are all old guys. In case you haven't watched it, the Big Three is actually a very entertaining product. And the general deal is that the games are short. Every team, it's a traveling road show, like Chris said. Every team comes on the road show, and then they have like a 3-hour block of programming, and then they all play a game in there. It's very entertaining, and but it's half court basketball. So it's just not as hard on your body, which means that Lamar Odom and Baron Davis truly were not prepared. You really have to do a lot to not be prepared for this. So, they're in Brooklyn on Saturday, Chris.
Oh, really?
Or it's on no, not Saturday, Sunday on the 14th. So that's smart. So you can go. The show will not be released until after this is over, but Chris, you can go. It's at the Barclays Center. Tip off is noon.
I wish I will not be around to go, but I kind of makes me think I'll pay attention in the future because I do think it'd probably be a fun afternoon.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm kind of scanning it myself here because they're not coming to Houston. Unfortunately, they're going to be in San Antonio, and I'm not going to San Antonio for the Big Three. Sorry, but anyway, point is here. We've now found the line of who is qualified, not qualified. If they're cutting a guy like Lamar Odom, who has a lot of name recognition for a lot of reasons, the whole Kardashian nonsense, people know him from that. If they're cutting Lamar Odom, that means they're doing fairly well because they can survive without his name. So I think that's a good sign. If nothing else, that's a good sign that the Big Three is actually succeeding. And they've got, unlike the AAF, these people, the Big Three actually has legitimate network TV time, So they've done it well. This is a case study in how to start a league. Get some name recognition immediately. Start small. Do not try to bite off the entire world. They started small. They had, they just did Friday nights. You was on Friday nights before. Not a lot of teams. Lower expenses. This is an example of how to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it's also not the same product, right? As you said, Steve, you mentioned some of the things. It's obviously 3 players on 3. It's half court. It's more, what it is basically, which is brilliant on Ice Cube's part, is taking a kind of neighborhood to neighborhood product, which is 3 on 3 half court leagues in inner cities and the coasts and other places as well that have, kind of sustained themselves, or almost like youth leagues, and that's where some famous players in the NBA came out of those kind of those networks and those leagues. And so this is taking that approach and basically inserting old NBA stars. So exciting product kind of basketball that basketball fans are already used to. It's a radically different product than the NBA. So it's not even like you're trying to create yet, perhaps, an alternative to the big pro league, which is what the football product is mostly trying to do. The XFL will claim that it's going a little bit off course, but it's not. But this is a radically different product, so it doesn't even seen as a competitor just on its face value. And it really, the NBA has gotten a lot younger, quicker over the last 5 or 10 years. So if you look at, so there's a lot of players with name recognition that probably still have basketball left in them. So these are the just some of the names that are joining the league for this season 3: Jason Terry, Joe Johnson, Gilbert Arenas, Al Jefferson. So
Shannon Brown.
yeah, and then Big Baby, some people that are
Big Baby Davis.
yeah, they're
Who
returning.
just got
Carlos
kicked out.
Boozer.
Yeah.
So these are guys, if you've followed the NBA for the last 10 to 20 years, these are guys that were on championship teams, guys that were key contributors, guys that were all-stars. So they're just sort of like middle-aged basketball players, but in a sport where you can still perform at a high level.
Especially on a half-court setting.
Yeah. Right, yeah, you're not worried
Now-
about
now,
defense,
you know,
etc.
Ice Cube is really a smart guy. The only reason I started watching the Big Three was because of the name recognition of the players. I can't say I would really want to watch this, particularly if it was just a bunch of guys who didn't make the NBA, and they're trying to use this as a NBA minor league, and I probably wouldn't watch it, to be honest. And the networks wouldn't put this on in prime time if that was the hook. It's the hook because they have name recognition on the players and the coaches. By the way, the coaches are well-known coaches as well. Now, what's interesting is Amari Stoudemire, who was the former, mainly known for being with the Phoenix Suns, but he was also with the Knicks, for a while, all-star. Amari Stoudemire sort of hinted around this week that he wants to use this as a means to return to the NBA. Now, if it works for him, I think that brings the Big Three into a whole other light. If it actually works and somebody actually signs him out of this, I think you might see other players like him who aren't maybe over the hill. Like Lamar Odom's over the hill, and he's got a bunch of other problems, right? And Lamar Odom's never going to be in the NBA again. But you might see a different kind of player in the Big Three if it actually works for Amari Stoudemire.
I think that's a really fascinating thing to keep an eye on. One, it's a less physically impactful way to train and keep your skills sharp for guys that have injuries that might need a year or two, or that want to rehab their bodies at the end of a career. So I think watching what happens with Amari Stoudemire, not that I think it means this is going to be a minor league or whatever, but the NBA, professional basketball, is so driven, as we know, just coming off free agent period, by the individual desires, wants, and power of the players, that if this becomes viable to just say, I'm not going to sign with anybody for a year and I'm going to play for a year in the Big Three as almost like kind of a rehab, image rehab, physical rehab, skills rehab, and players are opting to jump back and forth and see that as viable, that could be super interesting. So that's definitely something to watch. Also, we're about, let's call it I can't believe I can't think of his name. What's the biggest basketball player in the world?
Kobe Bryant.
Right. No.
Johnson.
No.
Sorry.
Playing.
LeBron James, Kawhi Leonard,
sorry. So
Kevin Durant.
We are in the twilight of what I'll call the LeBron James generation. The Dwayne Wades, the LeBron, there's a whole generation of players who are probably in the last 3 to 4. Some might even be at the end. Imagine if this is a viable option for that generation of players to walk into in a couple of years, and then how much legitimacy that potentially gives the league and starts to legitimize, future CBA conversations, some of these players that, want to play but don't want to have control of where and how. You could start to see it with LeBron and his peers. If they start to move this way at the end of their careers, it could be an interesting long-term challenge for the NBA to think about.
Yeah, I mean, right now the player salaries are nowhere near what certainly big players like LeBron James and those guys could make, okay? I mean, let's not pretend that they're making a ton of money in this, because they're not.
But some guys are making money. Like, if you look at the dude that just left Toronto, he left money on the table. So these guys have made so much money that, maybe it's stake in the league. You could imagine, at some point they're gonna have the power to not make financial decisions, especially if it increases their marketability broadly 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Your point here is that maybe someone takes a year off from $25 million a year to rehab, body injury, whatever, and is still playing basketball for certainly a reduced salary, but who cares? Because the idea here is they can go back and make more money once they rehab.
Yeah, or extend their career in the Big Three if it continues to grow. Both.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a thought. I mean, it's one of these. We'll have to see if it happens. Sort of thing. More than anything, because to date we haven't seen that. Everybody who's joined the Big Three so far has been somebody who's essentially retired.
Yeah.
And so we'll see if it happens in the future. This Amari Stoudemire thing. I mean, look, I like Amari Stoudemire. He was fun to watch, but I mean, really, he's over the hill. Okay, I mean, if he gets signed by an NBA team, this is going to be a desperation move.
Yeah.
Amari Stoudemire is not going to come in and be a noticeable contributor.
He has no knees.
No, he's right. He has no knees at all. So I mean, I hope it works out for him, and I'm rooting for him. But I think his long-term plan of reinvigorating his NBA career is probably more fantasy than reality.
Yeah, I just think it's fascinating in a league. No league has where players have more control and leverage, right? Like, I mean, that's just been evidenced in the last couple weeks. So if this potentially provides more leverage and more chips for basketball players to be almost ultimate free agents with their skill and celebrity status, it's just interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, if anybody is curious here, I'm doing this on the fly because I was dumb enough not to look this up ahead of time. Player salaries, just to give you a ballpark here, and I'm reading heavy.com on their sports section, and they claim that the weekly game checks are roughly about $100,000 per player. So that's what we're talking about. So it's not no money. That's real money. And, if they play the whole 10 or 11 game season, they could make $1 million or so each. So it's real. It's not a ton of money by Kawhi Leonard standards, but it is a lot of money. So if somebody like, Kendrick Perkins, who's not working at all anymore, he can go play and make $1 million, for playing over a summertime, that's a good thing. So that's the ballpark we're talking about in terms of salaries. I mean, roughly.
So this show has long been fascinated with the Big Three as a concept, as a league, as what its implications are. So,
wait a minute, hold on. I totally spoke out of turn here.
Uh-oh.
Wait a minute. Yeah, okay. Okay, so I'm reading the article again. I'm kind of on the fly here because we didn't prepare properly for this segment. Okay, SB Nation reported that players received $10,000 per game, and so the $100,000 would have been the season salary, not the per week salary. Just to be clear, so that's substantially less. That funds your life for a year. Still, if you have no income, but that's dramatically less than what I said. So
yeah, I think
carry on.
Especially for these guys even the guys who are washed out or whatever, made significant money in their pro careers. But
that means that they have positive cash flow for the year.
Yeah.
You could live on $100,000, if you had to, as a former basketball player.
Yeah, and it keeps them with a platform and so there's other things that probably are beneficial to them. So we're going to continue to watch this. It is super fascinating just what's going on with the Big Three, and if you are, maybe check their website. We can put it in the show notes if it's coming to your town, if it's barnstorming through your village, or check in on CBS sometime over the weekend and check out the product for yourself. See if there's they're there for you.
Yeah, okay, so the upcoming schedule here is Kansas City next week on the 20th, Oklahoma City on the 21st, Salt Lake City on the 27th, Chicago on August 3rd, Milwaukee the 4th, Miami August 10th, and then switch pages here, Dallas on the 17th, San Antonio on the 18th, and then the playoffs are in New Orleans, and the championships at the Staples Center in Los Angeles. That's the schedule.
Good stuff. Small, medium, and large markets in there, which is interesting.
Yeah. Oklahoma City and LA both.
Yeah. Might be better product in Oklahoma City than we'll see before.
That Oklahoma Thunder seem to be giving away their entire team. So yeah, maybe they need to put the Big Three the Oklahoma City Thunder in the Big Three league and see if they can win.
I wonder if a Big Three style is one of the things that the NBA league office is thinking about for their mid-season break.
For their mid-season tournament.
Yeah, I wouldn't be shocked.
You might as well. I mean, it's already a gimmick. You might as well go full gimmick. You know,
you'd be better off going full gimmick. Yeah.
I think we just found a show title, Chris.
Yes.
Let's go full gimmick.
Always go full gimmick.
Because the NFL has got this gimmicky season thing, so it's a gimmick show this week.
Yes, and as we transition into robot umpires,
Another gimmick.
Speaking of gimmicks, so, we've been talking about these wacky rules and changes that sports leagues are thinking about, but no sport has a funded, paid-for laboratory for wacky rules like Major League Baseball. So Major League Baseball has a contract with the Atlantic League, which is an independent league, minor league, which basically means that none of the teams have affiliations with Major League clubs. They are not farm teams they're not the Orioles farm team or they're not the Nationals farm team, et cetera, et cetera. They're just independent baseball teams. But the league itself actually has a contract with the Atlantic League to test possible rule changes. Some of the ones that have already sort of been, I think, are either being tested or going to be tested are things like stealing first base, like no pitcher mound visits, the amount of innings in a relief pitcher can, batters they can face, or minimum batters they can face. But maybe the most, at least on surface, science fiction one which was just rolled out at the Atlantic League's All-Star Game, and which I believe now they viewed successful is going to start rolling out into games before the season's over, is robot umpires. Now, if you're picturing, R2-D2 or whatever behind the catcher, that's not what they're talking about. Actually, the tech, just so we kind of get that in our heads, is a sensor that's actually connected to an iPhone, and then the results of that, sensor, the strike zone, essentially, sensor, is then relayed to a still human being umpire through a headpiece who then calls the ball or strike, etc. So that's just to kind of get it in your head. That is the robot. But robot umpire, Steve, I'm sure you have thoughts.
Oh my God, I'm so all for it. I'm 100% behind them. I'd rather have an R2-D2 back there than a live ump. I can't stand the NBA, the MLB umps. Here's the fundamental problem to me. The umps make themselves a part of the show. They're by far the most vocal officials union, in group of officials in any American sport by far, I think. Nobody wants to see the umpires become a part of the show, and they make themselves a part of the show by being very demonstrative in their actions and by refusing to listen to the managers and just tossing them out at the first word that comes out of their mouth. And from a game perspective, whatever level of baseball you have played, and my kids have played baseball for a long, long time, as I've said before on this show. All umpires have a different strike zone. Okay? Well, guess what? The strike zone is defined. It's not whatever the umpire thinks it is. It's basically the chest to the knees. Okay? So if you have Randy Johnson up there batting, who was 6'10", the strike zone is really large. Whereas if you have a guy who's the guy who was 5'6", who used to be on the Cardinals a few years ago, I mean, he's got a very small strike zone, right? And so that is a strike zone. Major League Baseball umpires tend to not call strikes high, for example, okay? If it gets above much about the waist or the belt area, then the umps tend to not call them. Well, apparently in the Atlantic League and the All-Star Game, the robot was calling strikes high. What Major League Baseball umps would never call, they were calling the strike zone as the computer defined it. Major League Baseball umps usually don't call high strikes, or a lot of times don't. And so what you're going to get is a more consistent application of the strike zone. So the batters and the pitchers both know what it's going to be, and they don't have to rely on these crazy umps, who are just being stubborn and being jerks about it. So I'm 100% behind the robot umps for that matter. And yeah, I think you're right. People are calling it a robot ump, but it's just technology, And there was a delay. I watched some of the clips from that All-Star game. there's like maybe a 1 to 2 second delay when the umpire is getting the signal in his head, ball or strike. And the umpire has to be there, by the way, and they made this point, the Atlantic League, did that in case the technology goes kaflooey, they have to have a guy there looking at the balls and strikes. So the umpire is the backup to the computer. So he's still standing behind the plate watching, and in case the iPhone doesn't work, he can still call a ball or a strike. So you're never going to truly have like R2D2 back there. You're going to always have a person. But oh my God, I'm 100% for it. Anything that shuts the umpires up and gets a consistent strike zone, amen.
I probably generally agree with that take. I mean, umpires in baseball, it's definitely the most theatrical umpire-referee situation in any major sport.
Yeah, it drives me crazy. You're not the show, dude.
Yeah.
I want to see Vlad Guerrero. I don't want to see you.
Vlad Guerrero Jr. That just shows our age.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, Junior. Right. Yeah.
So the one interesting thing, and you kind of started to touch on it, that they'll have to figure out, right? This is still probably tuning the system, and it's still probably a ways away from Major League Baseball, is if the ump still has some kind of discretion, or you don't have a way to manage the ump, then, because I can see making a case that it's like, oh, it's data for the umpire, but they're still making a judgment call, then that just opens up a Pandora's box.
Yeah, because that is, in case we didn't make this point clear, I think you did, and I can't remember if we made this point clear or not, but the rule here was that the umpire had the final discretion, okay? And so, in the Atlantic League, umps are different than Major League, but y'all have to understand that there's a ton of ego in Major League Baseball umpiring, okay? I don't think Major League Baseball umpires want anything to do with somebody telling them how to call a ball or a strike. And some of these guys who have a lot of ego, and the players know who they are. I can't recite any names, but the players know who they are. And I think there's a significant portion of these umpires who would just go, if they don't agree with the call in their head, they're just going to do what they want anyway. I think it needs to be mandatory. The umpire, unless there's some completely unreasonable call, meaning the system has become defective, I think the umpire I don't think the umpire should have discretion. I think the umpire should be required to make the call, and if they don't, I mean, there's a record of it in the computer, in the iPhone computer. I think the managers ought to be allowed to check the iPhone to see if, in case or maybe the umpire doesn't make a call. Maybe there's a red or green light, behind the plate and everybody can see it.
Yeah.
How about that?
I think both from a rules standpoint, from a technology standpoint, and then a process standpoint, that'll be the area that you'd have to get right for it, to move out of the experimental phase.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I strongly disagree with the umps having any discretion in it whatsoever. And I would think that the umpires union would strongly object to being told what to do by a computer. Yeah. So at the Major League Baseball level, at least.
Fascinating, though. And so if we kind of take it up a level, this idea, I love what Major League Baseball is doing here by having, and I love what the Atlantic League is doing here. What a great relationship for both sides. One, the idea that, God forbid we actually try these things out in game situations and experiment and look at data, broadly defined, to make decisions about rules is super interesting. And I think from an Atlantic League standpoint, how brilliant. This gives that league, which, like I said, has no major league team affiliations involved in their league. And, minor league baseball dots the country. So, and a lot of the draw is that, this is a Mets farm team or this is a Braves farm team. That's a draw for a lot of the ticket receipts, a lot of the fandom. So a league which has an identity as this laboratory for the Major League Baseball, who wouldn't go to a game to see how stealing first base would work? You could even hate it, but that doesn't mean you wouldn't want to go and sit there and see how it plays out in a game. That's so fascinating and such awesome marketing and smart business for the Atlantic League.
Well, yeah, because who's heard of the Atlantic League, right?
Right.
Well, it turns out I have heard of the Atlantic League because there is an Atlantic League team in the Houston area, the Sugarland Skeeters. I didn't realize. Yeah, they're the Skeeters, the Sugarland Skeeters, and they put on a pretty good product. And they've had some gimmicks. They had a former Houston Rocket center who's a baseball player out there, pitch a game. He had about a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. They've done some gimmicks like that before. I didn't realize until this whole thing came up that the Skeeters are part of the Atlantic League. I will probably go to a Skeeters game just to see how this robot ump thing works. I think what it's from the bigger picture, like you said, is it's driving interest in this Atlantic League. Now people are going to pay attention to it. Whereas, again, I knew about the Sugarland Skeeters, but nobody outside the city of Houston has ever heard of the Skeeters, necessarily. So I think it's a great thing. And yeah, you're right. I mean, what a great idea. God forbid we actually try some of these ideas out. Like the NFL has been so stubborn about instant replay, for example. They're so stubborn about expanding it. I mean, in my view, in the NFL, instant replay, you need to have every action that occurs on the football field needs to be subject to instant replay. I'm not saying give coaches 10 challenges. Give them the same number of challenges, fine, but there ought to be nothing that the coach can't challenge. That's just my view of it. Well, how about let's try it? See what happens. Don't let a bunch of stodgy billionaires in a 5-star resort in, Miami determine it. Let's try it out. And so Major League Baseball hires the freaking Atlantic League, whoever that is, to go try it. And let's see if it works. And so, NFL, maybe you ought to go to there's a million little football leagues out there. Have one of them try out a full instant replay, see what happens. So it's a really good idea, and I don't like some of the other ideas, that they're trying in the Atlantic League. Some of the others I think are silly. They're kicking around no mound visits. I mean, that's part of baseball, for example.
And you'll be interested to know because that's where we actually have some data, and the reason to do the rationale is to reduce game time.
Yeah, I know. I don't care about that.
No, but that's what I'm saying. It didn't. Or the difference was infinitesimal. It was like the average game was a minute to 2 minutes faster. It had real a negligible effect. So it actually that's where the testing the hypothesis actually does. That's why you test a hypothesis.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good point. I didn't realize that we had the data to it already. I mean, that's a good point because the mound visits have a value, to an in-game value. Sometimes you need to talk to the pitcher, even the catcher, needs to talk. They need to work out signs. They need to talk about strategy. Sometimes the managers go out there just to give the pitcher a break because he's off kilter and, you got to get his mind right. I mean, there's a reason why the mound visits happen. And if there's no tangential benefit of reducing game time, because I think Major League Baseball for the average fan wants to reduce game time to keep interest, right? Not people like me are going to watch it anyway, but like your average guy or gal, who's going to watch a baseball game. If it's a little bit shorter, the idea is it'll hold their attention span. So, I mean, I get it. But now what we've established here, what you're saying is that we know limiting mound visits doesn't work. And so why mess with the game if it's not going to result in the benefit to it? And so we've tried that out. Oh my God. It's a miracle. So pay attention, NFL. That's what I say.
Yeah.
Pay attention.
Yeah, I love that. I just think it's such a smart, proactive, and then data and evidence-based way to do this. So kudos to Major League Baseball and congratulations Atlantic League for understanding your opportunities and your product.
And finally dragging me to a Skeeters game. I mean, I'm serious. It's down in Sugarland. They're the Sugarland Skeeters. Sugarland is a suburb of Houston, and I'll probably go just to see how it works. And so it's worked. That's the Atlantic League is doing it for two reasons. One, Major League Baseball is no doubtedly paying them money. They're not doing this for free. Major League Baseball is probably buying the technology, and they're probably also paying them some sort of fee, to do it. And so that's one reason. And the second reason, like I've just been saying, is that they want doing it because they want to drive interest in their product. So it's a win-win for everybody. Amen. I'm not a fan of most of these baseball rules that we're changing. I'm not a fan of the pitcher clock. I'm not a fan of reducing mound visits. I just don't like the idea of why mess with something that's not broken.
What do you think about the idea of having a reliever face a minimum number of batters?
What's the point? I mean, I guess the point here is you're going to reduce pitching changes takes time, and so you get your 8 warm up pitches, and if you eliminate that, But I like the strategy of it, and the Saber nerds really love the strategy of it, because there's a lot of data-driven player management now, and so especially if you get to playoff baseball, like the World Series last year, the Dodgers and the Red Sox were almost going batter by batter pitching changes, there at the end of some of these games. And I kind of like the strategy of it. But again, I'm not one that's too concerned about shaving 20 minutes off a baseball game. So I'm not who they're targeting because I'm a baseball fan. They're targeting. I don't think you're as much of a baseball fan as I am, Chris.
No,
I know you're a big hockey fan, so they're really targeting Chris Larry, not Steve.
I would definitely.
So I would throw it back at you and say, what do you think? To me, I love it because we know this batter's better against lefties. Maybe he's got a great changeup, and so we need to have him face this batter. I mean, I love that, but that's not what they're concerned about.
I'm generally anti rule changes whose only goal is to reduce the time of games across sports. I think even your moderate fans, your playoff check-in fans, etc., which I think is probably where I am at with baseball, no one's noticing a 5, even 10-minute delay in the games. And also, most people, probably mostly rightly so, blame commercials, television contracts, those business elements of why games are longer, not mound visits, right? So, I think the perception is that those are the issues anyway, TV timeouts, et cetera, and even those sports that don't have them, they figure out ways to put in TV timeouts.
Well, I think you said the magic words right there. It's, are you going to get someone who's not a baseball fan who's going to go, well, thank God, now that the game's 10 minutes shorter, I'm certainly going to sit down and watch it now. I mean, of course not. I mean, that's not going to make a single bit. Games are long. If you're going to watch any sport, you're choosing to spend your afternoon or your evening watching a sporting event, and 10 minutes here or there is not going to make a hill of beans worth of difference,
No,
I don't think.
Not at all. Now, there's a part of me that likes the idea, this is where, I'm not this way in many things, but this is one of those, can we bring us back to when men were men type of thinking. I do like the idea that I like the idea that you actually have to pitch yourself out of problems and stuff like that. So there's an appeal to that, but if I'm critical about it past the game time, I think it does reduce the interesting parts of strategy, especially in the postseason. So I think it actually has a chilling effect on the interesting, the engagement in the game, where you actually, and the chess match of a baseball game at that stakes level. Those kind of move by move things are fascinating, and they're really thrilling parts of the game. And then 2, what you would see is innings would go south a lot faster, which would give you more lopsided games, I would guess, over time. Because if you've got to leave some pitcher out there who's getting battered around, in the 6th or 7th inning, and a 3-2 game goes to 7-2 or 8-2, who wants to watch that? I'd much rather see the managers and the teams, have the strategy capability to maintain close games. I mean, I want a close game, not a blowout. That's a given.
Yeah. Close games are more exciting to watch. You're going to hold your audience more than a close game that's longer is better than a blowout that's 10 minutes shorter. But Chris, you're going to have to go read some Noam Chomsky or something because you've really lost your liberal street cred. What we've said here. What you said here is that you don't like change, and you like the idea that when men were men, and that's just contrary to everything that Chris Larry believes in. So It's just wow.
It was a context of baseball.
Okay. But I'm totally with you on all of that. I really am, and I just think, certainly the commercial breaks are what extends all of these games. But But what's not on the table is decreasing the number of commercials, and so let's just make the game worse. In the hopes that it's gonna drag in a few extra fans. I don't know. I mean, and by the way, I think, attendance this year, aside from attendance with the good teams, is still high. The teams that are, there's no problem with attendance in ratings this year, except in some of these, like the Miami Marlins, Tampa Bay Rays, John and I talked about the Tampa Bay Rays on the last show. But, like the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs, all those teams are, attendance and ratings are doing fine. The Major League Baseball All-Star Game this past week had great ratings. Just came in just under the Pro Bowl ratings and trounced the NBA All-Star Game, by the way, ratings-wise. And I think the NBA is got this reputation of being kind of the woke sports league and progressive and blah blah blah. The truth of the matter is they make less money, and in some cases get less ratings than Major League Baseball, who's seen as kind of the stodgy white guy thing to a certain extent. So the reality is Major League Baseball is doing better than the NBA in many respects. Woke culture aside.
Yeah, I think it's probably just NBA has a younger audience, which is always
always what more preferred,
right?
To advertisers.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the big dividing line. And baseball's problems are on that front are mostly self-inflicted, right? Like dumb expansion, being in bad markets. Like if they would have managed their greed in some of those cases and had smarter growth, I think the things that you can kind of ding them with would be less.
Yeah, I think so. And they've let some bad. Major League Baseball's compromised their standards when it comes to ownership more than the other leagues too. Okay, like Derek Jeter. They really compromised their financial standards to get to shoehorn Derek Jeter into the ownership of the Marlins, okay? There's, generally speaking, all these leagues have debt rules. And what I mean by debt rule is they don't want their teams leveraged, meaning money borrowed to buy the team more than a certain percentage. And there are rules about that in the constitutions of these leagues. Well, Major League Baseball has thrown those rules out the window time and time again because they want a certain person involved in ownership. Derek Jeter is one of them. Derek Jeter's ownership group did not have close to the amount of money needed to really meet the debt rules. And so they just went, who cares? And the reason why they don't want teams with a lot of debt is that if it really goes south, Major League Baseball wants to be able to buy out these loans and not allow a bank to own a team. That's why this kind of thing is in place. So baseball has made a lot of dumb decisions. Yeah, I mean they've had dumb owners more than any league. They've expanded to places they shouldn't be in. They shouldn't be in Tampa. They really shouldn't. For example. So I agree with you. The game is pure and the game is good. They've just kind of brought some problems on themselves. For sure.
As they all have. All right, this brings us probably to the end of this episode of It's Just Business. Steve, why don't you give the live read Hogstide Network commercial?
Okay. All right. First of all, Seasons of Discontent will return on the July 23rd, so keep an eye out for that. Rick Snyder will have lots of stuff to talk about, including his big trip to Europe. At least we can all live vicariously through him, on a European excursion. We've got tons of good written content. We're coming up on training camp. The news here is the Hogstye will be represented as credentialed media again at training camp. So we will be there, not for every day, but we have a pretty good presence this year. So there's that. And we've, of course, got the Hogstye show. We're still once a week until the season started, and then it will go back to a two shows a week thing once the season starts. So stay tuned and keep an eye out on the website for all things football and sports.
Awesome. And you can find the It's Just Business on Twitter at JustBusinessPod. So go ahead and follow us there. You can find me at ChrisLarry33, and you can find Steve lurking somewhere in the bowels of the Hogstye Twitter account. What's that handle?
It's at the Hogstye. And by the way, guys, sorry about the airplanes flying around.
Yes.
Chris is in Brooklyn, and there's nothing you can really do about it when you're recording in Manhattan unless you have, a studio. So,
yes, I apologize.
Sorry. Yeah, there's nothing we can do about it. But yeah, we're at the Hogstye.
It'll be, like NPR. They use ambient noise all the time to set mood.
And by the way, in terms of John, I did tweet at John because he asked us to in the last show we were all together at. And did he respond?
No.
Of course not. No, he did not. So I tweeted at him multiple times just to see what happens. He did not respond.
All right, well, I'm going to go purify my lefty bona fides at the nearest Bernie Sanders rally I can find, as per Steve's advice. And Steve, I think you have a good weekend as well.
Absolutely. I'm going to go listen to a Ted Cruz speech or something just to purify my bona fides.
All right. Bona fides all around. All right, see you in 2 weeks.
Bye.